Matthew 2 and verse 20 says, "Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." An angel spoke these words to Joseph in a dream. The family were in Egypt in order to keep Jesus safe. Now they are to return to Israel. This, of course, has echoes of times in the Old Testament. In Genesis 12, in the first 3 verses, we read, "Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I'll make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Abraham was tested as to whether he could trust God further than he could see him. He must leave his own country, where he thought God was, and go to a land that God would show him. He had no idea where he was going, according to Hebrews 11 and verse 8. 7 promises were made by God to Abraham in the passage that we just read. First of all, they would have their own country, which would be their home. God chose this land for the Hebrews. They would be a nation. This is different to a race. There is, after all, only one race, that's the human race, but they would be their own nation. It would be a theocracy, that is, the nation will be ruled by God with his laws. Abraham will be a blessing, because all people will be blessed through him. Abraham's name would be great. Well, we've proved that today, as I'm talking about him now. God would protect his people in their land. And there would be a universal blessing. Abraham was the beginning of the promise to God's people everywhere. There are 2 parts of the promise. The physical one of a land and a nation were temporary. Regarding the spiritual promise, notice that the whole of humanity will be affected by it. Everyone will be blessed who wants to be. This promise that was given began to be fulfilled soon after it was made. God put the wheels in motion straight away. The promise was renewed with David, and we read about it in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 11 and following, where it was told a descendant of his would sit on his throne forever. This promise also found its fulfillment ultimately in Christ, the descendant of David, and Galatians 3:16 talks about that. Abraham's descendants would be slaves in another land for 400 years, according to Genesis 12 and verse 13. His descendants will return from Egyptian bondage to the promised land, which would be called Israel, in Genesis 12 and verse 14. So God made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "To your descendants I give this land." All the people on earth will be blessed through you. Now this is really the main part of the promise, that all people on earth will be blessed through Abraham. The first part, the nation land part, magnifies the second part, which is spiritual. A descendant is promised to Abraham, which is then repeated to Isaac and Jacob. They would become a great nation. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob would inherit the land of Canaan, and from within these descendants would come one who would bring a blessing upon all nations, according to Genesis 22:18, and we see in its fulfillment Galatians 3:8 and verse 16. The promised inheritance of the land and becoming a nation was physical and temporary. The promised descendant was universal, spiritual, and eternal. The physical aspect of the promise was fulfilled, and now the spiritual aspect of a descendant has come to pass, and he is being taken by his parents out of Egypt back to the promised land, Israel, where he will become a blessing to all. We learn from Abraham that if we trust God and show it by obeying his commands, he will not fail to fulfill his promises.